Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening for at EDF Action, partner of the Environmental Defense Fund, meeting you at the intersection of climate and politics. My name is Alex Ross, and I work here to support our grassroots engagement program. We're so excited for our conversation focused on FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and how we can ensure communities have the resources to prepare for, mitigate, and rebuild after disasters. So FEMA and the states and communities that rely on federal resources for disaster mitigation have been in a state of chaos over the last year. Actions by the Trump administration have created uncertainty for states and local governments, those that seek FEMA support to prepare for and recover from disasters. The termination and withholding of FEMA funding that helps communities become more resilient to disasters, staffing cuts, delays and denials of disaster aid, and threats to the future of FEMA as an agency altogether have made it harder for states and localities to keep their residents, infrastructure, and livelihoods safe. Tonight, we're so lucky to have two guest speakers who can really share with us about the challenges that local governments are facing in the chaos around FEMA and where there need to be improvements. And we'll also hear a little bit about what is going on in Congress to push back. So before we dive in, I just wanted to remind folks that you can ask questions by sharing them in the comments from wherever you are watching from. So we'll have a short Q&A at the end, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. But thank you for sharing where you're calling in from. Let us know where you're calling in from this evening. So I'm really excited to introduce our first guest, Mayor Zeb Smathers, who was first elected to lead Canton, North Carolina in 2017, and has since then led major improvements in Canton's flood-resilient infrastructure, overseeing pump and drainage upgrades and strengthening town participation in FEMA-supported mitigation programs. In addition to leading advocacy for relief in the wake of Hurricane Helene, he has also pushed for rebuilding of essential public facilities like police and fire that have been delayed in the wake of storm damage. So please join me in welcoming from Western North Carolina, Mayor Zeb Smathers.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your Thursday evening with me. I'm sure everyone listening, you could be with family, you could be working on work stuff, doing whatever, but coming here and being with, this group who's had our back, not just in Canton, but North Carolina, through thick and thin, matters to me, and obviously matters to you, because I think in understanding the problem, this is not something isolated to a small mountain town. I think you can look across our, union at red states, blue states, and see that these disasters that we're facing, the intensity and the frequency is changing the narrative. I am a mayor of a town that is roughly 3,000 feet above sea level. And in the last 20 years, we have been hit by more flood events and hurricanes than Charleston, South Carolina. The idea that a mayor, in a town like Canton, I have to monitor tropical forecast as if Canton was 30 feet above sea level, not 3,000. So that just shows you where we are heading with, disasters in this country. That is not news to the people listening, but I think people that may have different views politically are starting to realize that this is not normal. So the conversation with FEMA is so important right now because we know the next storm's coming, the next wildfire's coming, the next earthquake is coming. And no matter where you live in the United States, you deserve the same amount of respect and resources as anyone else. That's what we sign up for. And so myself and others, especially coming after Hurricane Helene, we don't just want the resources and money to rebuild our backyards, but to change a system for everyone, because it weighs heavily on me and others here in West North Carolina. We're never going to be able to say thank you for everyone who had our back, said a prayer, sent supplies, that's coming back to visit us, came to help. But we can't help change the system, and we know the system has to change. Do I think that FEMA needs to be eliminated completely? Absolutely not. I think that is nonsense. But we need major reforms. And, the story of myself, a little bit about me, I am eighth generation to call the mountains of West North Carolina home. I grew up here, went to our great public school system, went to Duke University for undergrad, law school at Carolina. So I'm the best of both blues, and came home to practice law, and saw a town which was again suffered, like so many small towns across, this country, and really was just shutting its doors. And we had to rebuild the belief that Canton had a future and that the people living here, they deserve the very best. They deserve nice restaurants and good schools and clean parks and clean water. And their best days were not behind them, but ahead of them. Because I believe, probably like many people on here, there's more Cantons than Charlottes. That doesn't take away from the big cities, but I think everyone on this call has some connection to a small town. And again, no matter where you live and where you call home, you matter. And so getting the resources in really the worst parts of your life, is so important. But again, my dad was mayor in 2004 when within 10 days, two hurricanes hit Canton, from the Gulf Coast. East Coast storms don't bother us. It's the Gulf storms coming straight up into the mountains like Helene that do. And I was in college at that point, and we saw breakdowns of FEMA in 2004. This was a year before Katrina. There were a lot of people surprised about how bad FEMA operated in Katrina, but I can promise you the people in Canton, we weren't surprised. They had issues in dealing with us in Canton, so I wasn't surprised when they had issues in the Crescent City. And so that really was my first sort of understanding of FEMA, was all the way back to 2004. I was mayor in 2021 when the remnants of Tropical Storm Fred really created a demonic flash flood in Canton. We lost 6 lives. We lost half of our town, including our town hall, fire department, police department. My sister lost her house then. She lost it again in Helene. And, again, I am a Democrat. And, I was advocating, and had issues with the White House with President Biden. It took weeks and weeks and weeks until we got our declaration to get FEMA fully involved. And, even at that point, I was actually in the water helping get people out. So this was obviously very personal to me, and I had to go against my own political party to say these delays have consequences. So we started picking ourselves back up. We suffered a major mill closure in 2023 where we lost 1,100 jobs when our paper mill, which has been here for over 115 years, closed. That's its own story. And then Helene came. So we started preparing for Helene about a week in advance because I saw this storm forming in the Gulf, and we don't take chances in Canton anymore. So we started working with small businesses and homes and getting stuff out. Sadly, West North Carolina, didn't have that experience and to prepare. So we had a week because of our own initiative. Many towns just had 24 hours. And obviously all of us saw what Helene did. FEMA responded better this time than they did in 2021. And, obviously we lost communications for 5 days. No cell phones, no communication. We were navigating storm recovery in the 21st century storm with 20th century technology, going door to door, passing notes. But FEMA was here. FEMA was here in the hours, but we saw so much misinformation. I tell people, you can say FEMA didn't do a good job, but you can't say they weren't here doing search and rescue and helping us. But as this process has gone on, and we have gone from one administration to the next, promises are being made, promises are not being kept. The delays in Washington getting us the money and resources to rebuild our community is inexcusable. And so many times I run into just exactly that, excuses. You call and get this answer, it's someone else. Well, I can't do this because of that. I've said time and time again, FEMA needs, the people working for FEMA need a picture of someone who has lost everything during this storm or any other disaster. And when they leave, they need to ask themselves, did I do everything I could today to help that family? And if you didn't, you need to quit. And some of it's bureaucratic. Some of it's just been, it's not an excuse. However, it's also been complicated when you have delays put in place because the secretary has to sign personally, items on her desk, or we're distracted by other issues. The delays have real world consequences. You have people that are paying mortgages with the expectation that money's coming. And this is where I have to give a lot of, hard news to people. In 21, I have an alderman sits next to me at our council meetings. He lost his home and his mother's home in 21. He just got his FEMA buyout money 3 months ago. There are people expecting their ability to stay in the place they've called home for decades on the expectation that money's coming. And I have a hard time believing that it is. And on top of that, I have a town hall and a police department that is ready to be rebuilt, but waiting for delays. We can't respond to local disasters when our own people don't have a place to permanently call home and operating out of trailers. There's a lot of great people that work for FEMA. It's hard to sit here and sort of cast everyone in that. But I think it just comes down to the audacity to find solutions, not make excuses, and reform this system. I think one of the best people who spoke about this is Congressman Chuck Edwards, a Republican, putting forth real reforms, to put in place. Those reforms have fallen on deaf ears from his own administration. And so it's just very frustrating to see so many of your family and friends who want to continue to call this place home, and Washington is failing them. And it's just excuses, it's bureaucracy. The money is there, it's sitting there, it's been allocated, and that's the hard part. And again, it's hard for local governments to, we have to, we can't debt spend. Unlike our federal friends, we cannot spend money we do not have. And so waiting on those reimbursements takes time. But again, I think through all these crises, it boils down to respect. When you have people working to find solutions, getting you the money, helping you out constantly, they show you that you matter and that they respect you. And again, time and time again, because this is my backyard, my family and friends, no matter where you call home, you matter. And again, because I've said it time and time again, other than the words I love you, the most important word in the English language is home. And wherever you call home, you deserve the same amount of respect and resources as anybody else. And it's just a matter of convincing Washington and FEMA that they matter, and we're way overdue for promises to be kept.
Sorry, I was muted there. But really appreciate your comments, and I think really underscores the importance of these resources for local communities to really rebuild in the wake of disaster, and that it shouldn't be politicized, right, and should be awarded in a way that is efficient and helpful for communities to really respond in the ways that they need. And I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into conversation, and so I want to introduce our senior legislative analyst here at EDF, who works on all things flood resilience and disaster mitigation, Sarah Henshaw. Welcome.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks again for spending your evening with us, and thanks so much, Mayor Smathers, for sharing some of your experience with us. I feel like you alluded to this a little bit, but many small towns struggle with limited staff capacity and aging infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit more about how uncertainty around the future of FEMA and the resources that it provides to small towns, how does that affect you and your community's ability to prepare for disasters and to kind of continue these recovery efforts?
I think we might have lost the mayor.
Oh,
there he is.
I lost you. I couldn't hear you, Sarah.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Is that better?
I can.
Okay, I will just repeat my question. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think you alluded to this earlier, Mayor, but many small towns struggle with limited staff capacity and aging infrastructure. Can you speak a little bit more to how the let's see. What about now, Mayor? Is that better?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I wonder, is it just audio on your end or?
Is that better? No, if the, Alex,
might
can
have,
you hear me?
yeah, some connection issues.
Alex, do you just want to take a question? I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, here, let me try to re-add him to the stage. Alrighty. Mayor, can you hear me okay? Yeah, I don't know.
Alex, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
But seems our mayor got frozen out somehow.
Okay, do we want to, I don't know, do we want to transition into a conversation with Lauren while we see if the mayor can figure out his audio issues?
Yes, let's go ahead and do that. Would you mind introducing Lauren a little bit?
Yes. Sorry about that, folks. Hopefully y'all can hear me okay now. Hopefully we can come back to the mayor. But yeah, in the meantime, we have Lauren Groh here. She is a staff member on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee that introduced the bipartisan FEMA Act this past year. So yeah, Lauren, definitely thanks again for joining us. Want to learn a little bit more about kind of the process to put the FEMA Act together. And then, we would love to learn more about what's in that bill.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, and for having me here tonight, and for everyone else for hopping on the call in the evening. Really honored to be able to speak to you all about the FEMA Act. So this is a bill that the committee introduced around this past summer and had been drafting since the beginning of 2025. But, the work on the bill definitely didn't just start this Congress or last year. It's really a culmination of years-long efforts by the committee to conduct oversight following disasters, to hear from stakeholders and survivors on the ground about the issues that they've been having accessing disaster survivor assistance. We saw the concerns, particularly in the individual assistance and housing space following the Maui wildfires, and then to the mayor's comments about the horrors of Helene. On a bipartisan basis, we actually did a trip down to North Carolina about a month after that hurricane to view the damages and review what was working and what wasn't on the ground. And what we found is that disaster after disaster, we were hearing the same complaints. I think with high profile events like Helene, they were broadcast in the news more, concerns about survivors being able to access payments to repair their homes, the slow timeline between having a home be damaged and made uninhabitable and then receiving direct or long-term housing assistance from FEMA. The slow way that FEMA reimbursements work when it comes to rebuilding public infrastructure. We keep hearing that particularly small towns and counties can't front the payments to rebuild infrastructure in a timely manner because they are so constrained by their budgets, and they have to have a balanced budget. And so, we took all of that information and we sat down at the beginning of 25 and we wrote this really comprehensive bill that I think, my boss on the Democratic side and I think on the Republican side, we're all really proud of and are pleased with the product we were able to put together. And throughout our process, we engaged with as many stakeholders as we possibly could. I think we talked to over 150 stakeholders throughout the process of writing this bill. And we did something that the committee doesn't typically do, which is once we finished writing it, we pasted it on our website for about 2 months and told folks, read the product that we have and give us your comments. Let us know what we forgot, what you think we should do differently. And that way that we can have the best final version possible. And so we did that. We finally introduced the bill and then we marked it up. So we advanced it through the T&I committee at the end of September. I think that there have been a lot of questions about, well, how does this bill fit in with the administration's comments about FEMA? Or how does this bill fit in with the FEMA Review Council? And, like I said, this is a culmination of years of oversight on the T&I committee. We don't need the work of the FEMA Review Council to move our bill forward, right? Like, we've done the work. We've talked to 150 people. We're really confident in our product, and both Ranking Member Larson and Chair Sam Graves have said that, in the media. And I'll leave it there. And Sarah, if you want to ask your next question.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for giving some background on the bill. I think we are just going to switch over to a panel type of situation so we can ask you questions and ask the mayor questions now that he's rejoined.
Perfect.
Thanks for working with us, everyone. Lauren, would love to learn a little bit more specifically about what changes the bill makes to, strengthen the ability of states and communities to be able to be more resilient to disasters.
Yeah, no, resilience was really a foundation of the bill. We all the members of the committee, really believe the science, right? That every dollar invested in resilience saves up to $6 on the back end after a disaster. And so we incorporated it into all of FEMA's programs. On the public assistance side, which is rebuilding FEMA, public infrastructure after a disaster, we make it so when applicants or states are initially submitting their scope of work for, say, a damaged bridge, they can include mitigative measures to make that bridge more resilient to future disasters in that initial repair, scope of work request. Currently, the way it would work is that the applicant would have to do a separate scope of work, which triggers a far more complicated process. And thus, a lot of folks don't incorporate mitigation when they're doing repair work with FEMA. Additionally, they would be able to incorporate that mitigation work into the typical cost share structure for the project. So the project cost $10 million and it was going to cost an additional $3 million to do the mitigation. They would just submit a $13 million project, and then the cost share would balance out from there. On the individual assistance side, we also, essentially double the funding that individuals would have to make their homes more resilient to disasters when they're repairing their home post-disaster. And so we're really hopeful that will enable folks to build back better and to stay in the communities that they love so much. And then finally, on the FEMA mitigation program side, we really solidify, Congress's belief that the BRIC program and the HMGP program should exist and should be fully funded and fully operational. On the BRIC side of things, we transition from a competitive program to a formula-based program to give states and communities reliability and consistency in the awards they can expect each year. And that formula would be based on both risk and population and vulnerability to disasters. And on the HMGP side, we changed the structure where HMGP is primarily a reimbursement mitigation program to making it an upfront mitigation program. But in order to enable to continue doing really large mitigation projects, which is what BRIC encouraged, we changed the law in enabling applicants to combine their BRIC and HMGP money on a single project. And then we also say that they can combine FEMA mitigation dollars with any other federal grant. And so that way we're hopeful states and counties can really be innovative in what they put together.
Super helpful, Lauren. Thank you so much for giving us more information on that. I have one more question for you before we go back to Mayor Smathers. One more thing I'd love to learn a little bit more about and kind of connect the dots here is how the FEMA Act addresses some of Mayor Smathers' concerns about, the delays in the reimbursement of funding or, simplification of rebuilding processes. Do you have anything to add on kind of how the bill would address some of those concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mayor Smathers, we hear you, and we know that the process right now isn't working. And that's why on The PA side, we really transition from reimbursement on a project by project basis to upfront payment on a project by project basis. So what the applicant would do if our bill were to become law is put together the repair scope of work for their project. Again, we'll say we're repairing a bridge. They would get, a locally licensed official to sign off on the engineering and the licensing for that project, which they already have to do. And then unless FEMA finds evidence of criminal fraud, they would have to approve that project within, I believe it's 120 days. And so once it's approved, that money goes out the door, hits the state bank account, and that's the full federal share. And that way communities can really start rebuilding a lot faster. Similarly on the mitigation side, we would have a similar structure for the hazard mitigation grant program. And then we also made several amendments to ensure mitigation projects are approved more quickly by FEMA. Right now, they get held up in a long review process and a lengthy cost benefit analysis that unfortunately has been a deterrent to mitigation. And so we really take a look at that and find ways to expedite that process.
Thanks, Lauren. So I'll go back to Mayor Smathers for your question. Lauren gave us some really great information about how the FEMA Act makes improvements to FEMA's resilience functions. Zeb, I'm wondering if you can tell us more about what mitigation and disaster preparation looks like in a community like yours.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. And I've talked to Republican, Democrat colleagues, and there's a lot of questions, but there is a sincere bipartisan leadership movement in Washington to really make strides on this. It is just my prayer and the hopes of so many on the ground that it doesn't get lost in some bureaucratic tug of war. Because again, the reason we're here on Thursday night is we know our communities are either dealing with the disaster or are going to be. I think this is going to be the story of our time. But I do appreciate that, and just really listening to some of this discussion, especially around the BRIC grants, the efficiency. And the other thing I'll say this: hold us accountable. If we do not spend this money or there's fraud, we should be held accountable. And I will put that on the forefront of this. So it's a two-way street. We have a job to do; they have a job to do. But mitigation strategies here locally, you heard how Canton responded to Helene was based upon the storm we had 4 years ago. So we saw this storm coming, and we did a lot of low-cost, low-level mitigation strategies that allowed us to get businesses, schools, churches, and homes, back before others, because, that 24 hours of moving your inventory out is better than 12 months without having any income come in. I think if you live near a water, really anything, you have to have a plan, because twice now we saw creeks become streams, streams become rivers, and rivers become oceans. And there was a time, I was up here with Governor Cooper during Fred, and he pulled me to the side. He says, "Well, Mayor, where is the river?" And they had just rebuilt a house with a state program with FEMA help. And I said, "Well, Governor, that's part of our issue. You can't even see the river." That's where these storms are going now. Places that never flooded, people that never needed flood insurance are getting wiped out. So again, I think there's a lot of low-level strategies that you just got to take that risk with. Also, I think you have to, every single project, every dollar is, how can we do mitigation? How do we build back and do mitigation? I don't care if it's a park. I don't care if it's a business, a home. Everyone can do something to help themselves out, but in turn save money. Again, we are getting ready to redevelop a 100-acre site where this paper mill was. And my only demand is, as we rebuild, it has to incorporate, flood mitigation. I mean, how great will it be to have an outdoor, arena, and you may get a concert there on Saturday, but it floods on Tuesday and holds the water. I think you just have to sync those, and that just makes a lot of sense. And just we keep telling people that you can do both. And one thing which is a little bit controversial for some people, is making it easier to rebuild in some of these areas. I think we have to understand, and we have an obligation in understanding disasters when they hit, that socioeconomics and poverty play into it. I think we have to become comfortable talking about that so many of our friends and neighbors that live in impoverished areas are the first to be affected by natural disasters. And they may have less resources, less communication than others to respond. But when the storm waters go away and we talk about buyouts, we herald, recovery. But taking this buyout money whenever it may come really puts some restrictions on you to build back anything. I mean, we have a beautiful park downtown that's flooded every time that was part of a FEMA buyout from 2004. We can't even add bathrooms to a facility, outdoor bathrooms, because of FEMA regulations and floodplains and all that. I understand that, but I think we can do more to find a compromise to do both. Because if you cannot rebuild your tax base and incorporate mitigation, there's not really a recovery. You cannot turn all these communities into open grasslands. You should be able to build back areas, especially historic areas, because you can't lose that sense of the community. You can't lose your tax base. Obviously, some places you can't build back. But again, I like being very practical as a mayor and starting at yes until I have to say no. And I think people appreciate that. And I think the same could be said for some FEMA reforms to make it easier to build back if you fully incorporate mitigation. It may not be exactly how it was, but it is definitely built for the next storm.
Thanks so much, Deb. Yeah, that was a great answer. It's really great to hear that you're pushing for investments in mitigation and the rebuilding of your community in the wake of Helene. And I really appreciate you highlighting the multiple benefits of these types of projects. So, flood protection, but also like recreational areas. So yeah, really great to hear more about that. Looking at the clock, I think we can probably fit in one more question before we kind of turn over to our audience Q&A and our action ask. So yeah, one thing, maybe the last one I will have for you, Seb. Shortly after taking office, President Trump appointed this 12-person review council to provide recommendations for sweeping changes to FEMA. The review council has not yet released their report with these recommendations. We could expect that to come in the next couple of months. But we do understand that, the intention is for the responsibility in preparing for and recovering from disasters would largely shift to states who, like, as you know very well, have long relied on the federal government to help survivors when disasters happen. My question for you is, what role do you think federal and state government should play in the preparation for and response to disasters? And kind of like, what's your response to what this report could potentially look like?
Yeah. Well, first off, the standard we have to live up to is local leaders, but all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, is we have to meet the same sacrifice that the people that have been affected by these disasters have gone through. In 21, we ran our town hall for weeks with metal chairs and plastic tables. We met at all hours of the night. So again, personally, when I hear of a reform committee that is still waiting to produce a report, it's just disrespectful. This should have been done. Again, because so many people, much like Lauren, we're waiting on guidance so we can plan accordingly. So again, we don't need any more committees. We need action. And also in some of this, I understand the belief that, hey, let's turn this more over to the states. Well, that sounds good from a byline or in front of a podium, but unless your states have a system ready to catch these new reforms and ideas, there's not much to do. I mean, parking that money from Washington to Raleigh doesn't help get it back up the mountain. There's efficiencies that need to be put in. And, again, once you get the money to Raleigh, that doesn't mean it comes back up as quickly as it can. So again, it sounds good. It sounds efficient. But unless we have advance notice how to create a system in Raleigh, again, Governor Josh Stein, the General Assembly, bipartisan, work here with DEQ. We've already done some work just in case a major change comes out of DC. I hope they realize that we need FEMA. FEMA needs to be reformed, and go from there. But it's the only thing I'll say, and I hope I won't get myself in trouble here, is going back to this review committee. The promises made, the delays, it really does weigh on you. Again, when I know people that are paying mortgages for homes that no longer exist with the expectation, the belief that money is coming, is absolutely heartbreaking. They want their kids to be able to stay in schools and keep going to their churches. But you pair that with the affordability crisis, they're barely hanging on. So when I hear some of this political committees, to be blunt, I would much rather see bridges built in WNC than ballrooms in DC. When you see these distractions on other things, when our own people keep waiting for help and promises, you can't help but get a little bit angry.
All right, thanks everyone. I think we are nearing the end of our kind of direct Q&A with our guests. Alex, I think we're going to have Alex come on to kind of transition us into our action ask, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thank you both Mayor Smathers and Lauren for joining us this evening. Really, really helpful to hear about the different strategies that we're kind of employing in the face of increasingly devastating disaster, right? And I think like you shared about the dollar put towards mitigation is more money saved down the line, and I think that is such a critical part of the whole conversation. And so our action this evening is actually related to sort of the FEMA Act in the Senate. So we heard a little bit about the bill from Lauren, but we think it's a really important starting point for improving the agency and really making it more applicable for communities. Apologies, my screen is freaking out here. There we go. And while bipartisan bills like the FEMA Act may be slow moving in Congress, conversations are happening right now on the Hill that can really help shape FEMA's future. That's why it's really critical that our members of Congress are engaged in these discussions. So the federal government's role in disaster preparedness and response is essential to meet communities where they're at. And we're going to be sharing a link in the comments where you can take action and send a message directly to your senators about this issue, about FEMA reform and the need for disaster preparedness and mitigation in the face of climate disaster. So I will go ahead and share that now. And I was wondering while I'm doing that and while folks are taking action, if Lauren or Mayor Smathers, you wanted to share a little bit more just about your sort of personal experience, anything else you wanted to say about our conversation this evening.
I mean, I can just follow up on what Mayor Smathers was saying about rebuilding communities after disasters. You were talking about the realities of, you can't just get rid of what was there and necessarily move it all uphill. I mean, I know that would be the ideal dream, but I mean, I was out in Northwest Washington a few weeks ago looking at a community where, half of the homes had been raised using FEMA's HMGP grant and the other half hadn't. And the homes that were raised, there was a significant flood out there in December. The homes that were raised were fine. The homes that weren't were destroyed. And I mean, it was a definite demonstration that mitigation works. And sadly, a lot of the homes that were destroyed were waiting on HMGP money that's sitting on Kristi Noem's desk, awaiting that $100,000 review. It's been there since July, and that community is actually particularly well positioned to complete elevations quickly. And so I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that her delays caused all of those folks to lose everything. But you know, something that was really powerful that the former mayor said to me is, you know, you can't get, this community might be on the river, but you can't get rid of it. Like, this is the most affordable housing in Northwest Washington. You know, people need these homes, people need to live here. And so I think that's why, you know, in addition to focusing on community-wide resilience in our bill, we also focused on, you know, having money available for home retrofits, whether that be through the HMGP program or through BRIC. In the BRIC program, we actually amended the program to say that up to 10% of each state's allocation can be used for home retrofits, because we want to make sure that folks can get on their feet after disaster and not be so devastated.
Yeah, and I think that really underscores just like how big of an issue this is for everyone across the country right now, right? Like, no matter what sort of location you're living in, there are just increasing natural disasters that are happening every day, and communities need to be prepared. So thank you so much for sharing. And then Mayor Smathers.
I mean, I think you highlighted it, where if a mountain town, again, 3,000 feet above sea level, can flood 4 times in 20 years, it can and will happen in your community. And I think, you know, I think all of us on this call, you know, we understand the difficulties out there. We live in political times where, you know, it's easy to divide people. And I think part of making these reforms, having these conversations, sending those letters is because if you haven't been affected, you're going to be, is an opportunity to bring people together. And this is where the misinformation we saw in Helene was such heartbreaking. We saw the best of North Carolina. We saw the best of America. I mean, no one was checking voter ID cards when people were being pulled out of the river. There is such a story to be told here to bring people together, no matter where you are, to help these people. Because again, wherever you call home in these United States, you matter. You matter as a person. And it's just like, even like with debris cleanup, people kept saying, oh, it's just trash. You have to understand that these debris piles outside these people's doors are Little League trophies, their wedding albums, their memories. And every day when they walk out there and that debris is still sitting there, it opens that wound up. And so even the smallest parts of getting debris out as quickly as possible, because as government, if we can't do the small stuff correct, how are they going to trust us on the big stuff? And so I think that is leadership in dealing with floods. But I do think, and it may just be the, you know, the idealistic, you know, person, you know, spirit in me. There's an opportunity not just to fix the system and do a better delivering services, but really make this about patriotism and bringing people together and doing it the right way and not accepting anything less. Because when you talk to these people that have lost everything, again, that's the standard we have to live up to. If that's not what you're doing, again, I beg the secretary, go visit some of these people who you just heard from Lauren and look them in the eye and ask them, did you meet their sacrifice? And if you can't do that, you do not need to be in that position. I don't care if it's the lowest level person at the organization or the secretary. You are failing the American people when they need it the most. And if you can't do that, that's a failure of leadership, period.
Thank you. Really, I appreciate that and agree. So I'd love to answer some of the questions in the chat. Sarah, I don't know if you want to lead that off for us, or I can.
Sure. Yeah, I can see one. It looks like there's a couple of questions on overbuilding in low coastal areas and kind of like the effects of that. So I can speak a little bit more to that. I think, in some of these low coastal areas, those communities often, they're participating in a national flood insurance program or the NFIP. What we're seeing a lot with the NFIP is that, flood insurance doesn't accurately reflect flood risk, which often results in this overdevelopment in areas that are already more likely to flood, to your point of the question in the chat. So I think this is kind of where, our point throughout this conversation on the importance of mitigation really comes into play. There are lots of ways that communities can better prepare for storms. One thing that we talk a lot about in my advocacy, like to get to the root of the problem of this, flooding over and over again in these low-lying areas. Think about projects that restore natural wetlands and floodplains, since they are these natural sponges that, store large volumes of water when flooding happens. Another thing in coastal areas, we've seen multiple projects that focus on restoring coastal dunes that absorb storm surge and also help with erosion. And then something we're seeing more in places like Louisiana are, reconnecting rivers to floodplains. I would encourage, your communities to think more about ways to mitigate flooding and avoid overdevelopment in those areas.
Yeah, I can start by addressing that if that works. I'm from Florida, so I certainly am painfully aware of some of the poor development decisions that have been made in the state. Last time I was home, I went to the beach in St. Augustine. I live in Central Florida, and drove up the A1, and I mean, you just see like new homes being built along the beach that should not be there. Those are local zoning decisions, and so in Congress and at the federal government level, we actually have limited ability to govern exactly where homes are being built. I'm sure the mayor can appreciate that that's a local decision, and he probably wouldn't want us getting involved in local communities that we don't know enough about when it comes to how things should be built. But what we do, at least in one of our proposed reforms, is create incentives for communities to be thinking about climate change and resilience when making those land use decisions. For us, we increase the amount of disaster recovery dollars that a state could be eligible for by increasing the federal cost share percentage if they have made smart land use decisions. On the flood insurance side, I know this is a annoying bureaucratic note, but our committee doesn't have jurisdiction over flood insurance. That's actually the Financial Services Committee. So, I don't speak for the Financial Services Committee, but I think that on that side as well, there have been a lot of efforts to incorporate more science and also to ensure homes have access to the resources they need to build in retrofits and mitigative measures if they are in a special flood hazard area or really susceptible to risk.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, that was a great answer. I think we probably have time for one more question before we wrap up. I would love to take a question on, how much of FEMA's budget historically goes to helping communities prepare for disasters versus helping them recover after disasters. I think we've seen that historically FEMA, the majority of FEMA funding goes to recovery versus mitigation. I think Lauren hinted at this earlier, studies have shown that every dollar invested in mitigation can save up to $13 in future disaster costs down the road. I think we see that Congress tends to fund disasters more reactively rather than proactively. I think all that to say, communities are always going to need large investments in disaster recovery because storms, I think to Mayor Smathers' point earlier, are becoming more destructive. And people and infrastructure need to be restored quickly to keep communities functioning. But I do think that even a modest increase in mitigation funding pays off many times over by reducing future damage and, lowering future federal recovery costs and also, allowing communities to be able to stay functioning during disasters.
Any other reactions to that question before we wrap?
Sorry, Sarah, could you just reiterate the question part of that again?
Yeah, basically, historically, how Congress has invested in recovery versus mitigation, and just thinking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, we certainly invest far more money in disaster recovery than we have in mitigative measures. I mean, I would say 2000, with the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, is when Congress first started thinking about investing in mitigation at all. And then, we got the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and, back in, what was that, 2018, 2019, the BRIC program was authorized. So, I would say we're a little bit behind the ball in terms of creating these opportunities for federal investment and resilience. And I think that we were finally building momentum and we were finally moving forward. And then with this administration, we've kind of hit this brick wall and we're reversing again to not investing in mitigation. I mean, if you look at the data, this FEMA isn't spending any money on resilience. They've canceled the BRIC program, and all HMGP grants seem to be stuck in a never-ending review process. And so, we really want to see more of it moving forward, because, I think, we're going around the country and it's like, like I said, my boss's district in Washington flooded. There was a BRIC grant there that was supposed to build a flood wall that would have prevented a community from flooding that did. The DC water infrastructure system had a BRIC grant that from 2021 that was canceled. And now we have a massive sewage disaster. Like, these projects matter, and this money goes to projects that work. And so, unfortunately right now we're having to live with the consequences of what happens when that money goes away. And I think that, in an attempt to be positive, right, like we're really starting to realize, what we had and how important it was. And I'm hopeful that, in the future, in future Congresses and future administrations, it'll be a priority again. I mean, it's still a priority in Congress. Congressman Chuck Edwards has certainly continued to be vocal about the importance of mitigation grants and dollars. So we'll see where we go from here, but it definitely is critically important to these communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that, I think we can wrap up. Thank you both for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. I think we've had a really good discussion, and it's definitely given me lots to think about in terms of FEMA reform. So hopefully everyone gets a chance to check out the action that we shared in the chat. Contact your senators. Getting involved on this effort couldn't be more important right now. There's so many things, I think, at stake in the climate space, and it can be hard to focus when there's, one big thing after another. So I think this is a really tangible, actionable step you can take towards making a better climate future. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and we will see you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.